Hey everybody, today we are talking about story hooks. So what is a story hook? Well, so we're all used to the idea of something to kind of draw in our players, something that will get them interested in the story. This is your hook. A lot of the times storytellers will put this at the beginning of their games to kind of draw their players in right off the bat. And in writing, for example, that's something called an opening hook. It's that first line of dialogue or the first line in a story or a chapter that kind of draws a reader in and wants them to know what's going to happen next. These work the same way when running your tabletop game. These opening hooks are going to be that first interaction with the story your players have that will want them to kind of continue to play the game and figure out what's actually going on, or to get the root cause of what is, I guess, affecting the world around them in a way that kind of led to that first opening hook. In addition to this, we're going to talk a bit about overarching plots and how to get interconnectivity between sessions, because they all kind of go hand in hand, right? If you have a story that you're starting out with and you want to get your players hooked on and have them really investigate, you're going to want to have a larger plot line in place that they can actually explore and go down. You also want to make sure that your sessions are connected with story, with NPCs, with things that keep them threaded to the main plot itself. Even though we all have had players go completely off the rails on side quests or small details, you need to have those little threads in place so that you can kind of pull them back to the main story, right? Without railroading them. But how do you do this? Why is a story hook so important? Well, what it comes down to is to get a good buy-in from your players and to go outside the usual, so you're all at the tavern and some mysterious person approaches you and just hands them a quest. Or the often used, and in my experience anyways, you've been summoned to court to listen to X person in the hierarchy of the local region or the city or whatever it is, and they give you a mission. Mission-based games can be a lot of fun. And a lot of games are actually built around the idea of mission-based games, so like Shadowrun, etc. But really, in my opinion, those missions are kind of like side quests. They will contribute to the story, yes, but they're really mostly useful in building like an environment around your players that they feel they're interacting with and impacting, where like the main storyline is actually hidden behind the reason for the missions or those small threads that connect each one together, right? So even if you're doing things like Monster of the Week or Token Mission of the Week, you can still connect them to a larger plot line. And that's what you do with your story hooks. So the story hook doesn't have to be introduced the very first scene you have in a game. Yes, it's most common, and yes, it's actually really easy to do at that place. It's very well positioned to start the game off right away, with players kind of knowing something of the main storyline and using the story hook that you give them as kind of like that main tether to the storyline. But it's not really the only way you can do that. I've seen a lot of games that grow organically with player interactions because they have like the first part of a session that's just for them to roleplay and get to know each other's characters, the reason why they're all together, things of that nature, and then slowly you start feeding in plot hooks as you go, as they learn more about each other, like maybe their connections or, where they're at, things of that nature. But the story hook itself, when you distill it down to the basest idea, is what's there to pull your players to the plot. And a really good way I've found to do this, at least in my games, is by connecting each player in some way, even if it's just like a small tangential attachment to like a minor part of the plot, something personal in each character's background or their motivations really syncs up with the main plot. Those types of story hooks, when you take something that is part of a character's motivations or their backgrounds or people they know and make them part of your plot, the characters have more reason to want to get involved, right? And I think those types of story hooks make the best ones because it's not you as a storyteller or a dungeon master or a games master pushing them at the plot, it's them coming towards the plot. And those types of games, when you get that interaction right off the bat, can be a lot of fun to run. Now the next big question with that usually is, well, what if I have a new player or I have somebody at the table who didn't really do a backstory and there's not really a lot of stuff for me as a storyteller to latch onto to get them involved? That happens. It happens a lot actually, but don't fret when it does. If you can attach the majority of the players in the group, or even just one or two main players that you know are more active within your game, you can use them to kind of pull the rest of the group into the story, right? You can use the enthusiasm or the desire of one or two players at the table to kind of draw the rest of the group in and have their characters convince the other characters that, hey, this is important and here's why. And when you have that done, it actually can sometimes be just as good, if not better sometimes, than you actually putting personal hooks for each person. Because now it's not just that there are people in the group who are attached to the storyline or have personal reasons as a character to want to investigate it, but now you're actually having party interaction drive the story as well. And that can be really rewarding for the group. And it can start some fun little things. I've seen it turn into situations where one player's character decides to go with the group on this adventure, not because they wanted to, but because the main group or the party leader or whoever the face is of the group is like, yeah, I'll owe you a favor. And then another adventure can be built off of making that favor, come to roost, and actually becomes kind of a story hug of itself. And you can lay the groundwork for that, more hesitant player to actually have a reason to call the rest of the group to go with him to do another story. So those kinds of things can be fun. And there are a lot of ways to kind of get your players involved in them, but they're really important to kind of put up front and make them important in some way to at least one or two of your characters in the group. Now, with overarching plots and story leads, you have a lot of times where you'll have different sessions and different mini adventures or, subplots that will kind of connect into the larger plot. All these things should in some way kind of lead into your main storyline. It doesn't mean that you have to have them happen. It doesn't mean that you'll railroad players if they kind of step out of line, but you got to have some way to kind of pull them back subtly. Be it either through the promises of an NPC or relationships they've had with other NPCs or conversations they've had with the NPCs, things they discover in the world, stuff they've uncovered during their adventures. Give them some sort of impetus to want to continue, but don't really try to railroad them. That can be a little... it can be deflating, really, as a player. I've played in games where we've been able to tell that the storyteller was railroading us, and we had no other choices but to go within the storyline bounds, and it got really kind of like, it wasn't like we were in a prison or we were in a dungeon trying to escape. Those are common railroad avenues, but they kind of made sense logically for the world that you're stuck in at the time. But it's when you have other avenues, like an open world and other avenues available to you that just suddenly start getting shut off because a storyteller wants to shunt you in one direction, that can breed a little bit of like, really, he's doing this? Or they're gonna go about making us do it by hammering us into it. That can, one, become a joke to your players as a plot hammer, or two, can kind of breed like, I'm not really interested, I don't want to play. So you got to be very careful when you do those types of things. So the threads that you use, the other smaller hooks that you use to get somebody back on track with the story, should be more subtle, should be more... the player should believe it's their idea and their choice to go do it. Even though you've placed the threads down yourself to kind of entice them back to the story, they should always feel that they've been in control. Because once players start to feel they've lost agency, they can start looking for other things that have been happening that have also shown that they don't have as much agency as they think they do. So be careful, be subtle with those. Don't try to just hammer people in to your overarching plot. But the plot itself, we had these story threads we talked about that were going to pull people into it. Be sure to resolve those threads as the plot goes on. For example, if it's this big part of the story, the hook to get in is that somebody's niece or maybe their sister or an ex-girlfriend or boyfriend or an ex-coworker went missing, make sure you resolve that thread as part of the overarching plot. Because if you just leave it there and it's never resolved, it's kind of like that dangling carrot that's still there, and they're like, it's gotten rotten, like we're not even ever touching this, what's going on? So you gotta be sure to resolve that to kind of like consume it by the larger plot. For interconnectivity between sessions, what I like to do a lot of times to remind players of where they've been, because I don't play every week with each game, I usually do every other week, so we have 2 weeks between games, and kind of people can kind of forget what's going on. So what I think works really good to help, propel that type of connection between game sessions is to have a recap beginning of every game. And usually I'm not the one who does it. I usually say, hey guys, who wants to give a recap for last game? What went down? And then as the players start jogging their own memories and thinking about what happened, I can, then fill in the blanks if they missed something, or, if it's something really to another player that they weren't really kind of paying attention to, I can bring that up, things like that. So that helps to create this interconnectivity between your game sessions. Also, I think a good one is to make sure that whatever thread or whatever thing you ended up wrapping at the last game session, some of that's touched on at the beginning of play for the next session. For example, if they defeated a bad guy, let them get like either town crier news or it's on their vid feed, whatever system you're playing, they find out that, hey, this is progressing still, that happened. Remind them through the in-game world too of the things that they've done. Be that people they met before on other adventures coming in and being a recurring face that they've seen that helps them kind of keep this thread of people they've met and keep the idea that, yeah, we've made impact, like this world's still going and we've made actual changes, or there are consequences to what we've done. These types of things can help the game feel much more connected between sessions. And when you add that to like a session recap at the beginning of the game, it helps your players, and it helps me as a storyteller as well to hear them talk about it, to get back into the I guess the mode for the game that you're playing. So for example, if you guys played Cyberpunk last week and you're playing D&D this week and you want to kind of disconnect from Cyberpunk and get back into that D&D mode, by hearing people tell the stories of what went down the last session or the recap, and you kind of refreshing your own memory to what what details you want to fill in to the characters and the players, like explanations of what happened. It helps you get back into that mindset of where you were at the end of the last game session to propel this one forward, and that can really help create a lot of, okay, now I remember what we were going on, and yeah, I remember we talked to this one guy, we want to talk to him again. It can create this interconnectedness between the game sessions, so it's not just like weekly episodes or bi-weekly, or however often you play. These episodes that we play once in a while, but then we forget about it, and they're not really attached, they're just episodic things that we don't really have to, pay too much attention to. You start creating that level of interconnectivity and start doing recaps and start bringing back people that I met before. You create like this idea of the game sessions being connected in the same world. You create a stability in the environment around them that they can rely on and start to feed into, and that can create a bit of player buy-in that can really help as the story progresses, as you start going into your main plot arcs. And that also means that when you do this, sometimes those plot hook ideas that they had, the reasons that they wanted to get involved in the plot, get refreshed in their minds. They remember, oh yeah, I wanted to look into that because this happened and made my character really want to know what's going on. So you can use this idea of refreshing, everybody's memories of what happened, and for these recaps, you can use this idea of interconnectivity between NPCs, and the players, kind of like, let them believe and feel they're in a continuous world, to really kind of keep those plot hooks you planted originally fresh in their minds and keep them interested and running the story that you want to tell. It sounds a lot more complicated sometimes than it really is. These plot hook ideas can be used to great effect, especially if they're connected to a character's motivations, and less so to like, oh, you were just given a mission to do this. Some games are made for missions, like I said, but those that aren't, or even if you do missions and you want to kind of weave in a different, like more subtle thread to the overarching plot through those missions, using these plot hooks that are connected to a character's motivations, a character's backstory, their friends and family or other acquaintances, these can create an impetus for characters to want to continue to explore your story, and hopefully that impetus passes on to your players. They're like, oh wow, my character really got involved with this, I want to know where this goes. And that's the whole idea behind doing all these things for your game. The reason you do story hooks, the reason you do like little leads to stories and continuous story threads and interactive worlds, and you do things like interconnect your sessions, it's to keep your players having fun and interested in the game you're running. And once you use all those tools and start to learn how to like use them more effectively, because it takes practice, it really does, you'll find that your table is more and more enthusiastic for each session and can have a lot more fun when you sit down to tell that story. And it's not just you who gets that like answer, like, I want to run this game, I'm waiting to run this game, I'm so happy we're getting ready to play again. Your players will get the same thing too, and the table just comes alive. Anyways, that's it for this week. Again, if you like this material, hit the like button, subscribe if you want updates when we come live with new videos and ideas. The next couple of videos we're going to do are going to be about creating living worlds and about getting a little more into this idea of immersion in the table. When you got your players coming in, they really kind of get involved in the world that they're playing in, their characters get really attached to things. We're going to talk about how to start developing that. So until next time, have fun, guys.